We think we know Britain's wildlife. But there's a secret world beneath our feet. A hidden kingdom teems with millions of burrowing creatures. Their lives shrouded in mystery. Why do they live underground? And how do they raise their young? Their secret subterranean world remained unseen. Until now. We are breaking new ground in natural history. We've unearthed real animal burrows and created 3 lifelike replicas of our own. A rabbit warren, a watervole burrow, and a badger set. It's spring now, but winter was a busy time for our burrowers. Our rabbits have bred, but will their young learn the skills they need to survive? It's quite a brave moment for these little things, isn't it? Our 2 water voles got off on the wrong paw, but are things looking up?
If there are babies in there, that's where they'll be at the moment.
And our 7 orphaned badger cubs have begun to bond as a group. But can they master the badger basics?
This is the first time they've had the opportunity to dig.
And we uncover the dark secrets of this mystery creature. This is phenomenal.
Hopefully people may see moles in a different light.
We have a window on their lives like never before. Explore this magical world. As we ask in this programme, how do young burrowers grow up inside the burrow and prepare for their first taste of fresh air? It's spring in Britain's southwest, where in a unique experiment we've built 3 replica burrows. Our badger set is now home to a family of 7 playful orphans. And 100 miles away on a small Dartmoor farm, we've created a riverbank burrow for a pair of water voles. And a vast warren big enough for a whole community of rabbits. Our burrows aren't just underground, they're all equipped with protected outdoor spaces. How will our young burrowers prepare for the outside world? We'll watch as our badger cubs learn to communicate. As our newborn rabbits find their way out of the labyrinth of the warren. And as the next generation of young water voles grow up and get ready to leave home. There's a major clue that our 10 rabbits have enjoyed their first month in our warren. They've been breeding like rabbits. Led by head buck Thumper, the 2 squabbling males have already sired 7 litters between them. Hazel is the top female. And like nearly every adult doe in the warren, she has a litter of her own. There really is something quite enchanting and magical about this rabbit's nest. It's pulsing with young rabbits. At 2 weeks, these 7 kits have reached the next stage of development. They belong to Pipkin. And despite only suckling from mum for 3 minutes a day, they've matured rapidly. You see, rabbit milk is one of the most nutritious in the animal kingdom. They've gained sight, can now hear, and they weigh 5 times the amount they did at birth. And now that their fur is fully developed, they can leave the warmth of the nest and take their first few steps. But for the moment at least, they don't go beyond their mother's chamber. Their parents are from domestic stock, but they should behave as they would in the wild. Because our rabbit warren, like all of our burrows, is based on data from the real thing. They're the largest constructed burrows of their kind, but we want to see for ourselves the enormous scale and structural design of a wild warren. So 6 months ago at Devon's Bicton Park, we investigated an abandoned warren and began the most ambitious stage of our natural history project. Battling one of the worst winters on record, we filled the empty warren with 10 metric tons of liquid concrete and then left it to set. Now in spring, we're beginning the biggest wildlife excavation of its kind ever attempted in Britain. When we've finished, we'll have the most detailed picture ever of the rabbit's secret subterranean world. It's going to take another week to reveal every corner. Our badger set is located at Secret World Wildlife Rescue Centre in Somerset. It's been a few weeks since our cubs moved in. They're all rescued orphans, nursed back to health. Boisterous female Luna is the eldest and biggest, and she's already established her position at the head of the group. Like all of them, she's still just the equivalent age of a human tweenager. Now, this is the cub we've named Bramble. She'd been found alone and fighting for her life. One of the youngest and smallest cubs, she's had a tough time fitting into the group. And without the others, she's unlikely to survive when this group are released into the wild. It seems she's not quite ready yet to impress the boss, Luna. She tries her luck first with a more relaxed cub. Mr. Sleepyhead himself, Truffle. The moment Truffle went into our burrow, he made a cosy bed. And now all he does is lie in it. Bramble follows suit. She cuddles up to her new brother and then has a snooze. But there are other challenges ahead. They'll all be tested for TB, and when they're old enough and fit to be released, they'll need to dig a set of their own. But at just 2 months old, they've already begun to put their digging skills to the test.
You can see that they're actually natural-born digging machines. Look at the shape of their body, the narrow nose, and then it broadens over and tapers down.
So, will our cubs know how to tunnel out of trouble? To find out, our badger expert, Dr. Chris Cheeseman, wants to set them a challenge.
Well, what we're trying to do here is we're creating a blockage between this nest chamber and the one next door. There's a tunnel that links them. Badgers love to dig in soft soils, typically sandstone, and it does collapse. And it's going to be interesting to see whether these badgers actually dig their way through.
If our cubs can't master this skill, they simply won't survive in the wild. And only time will tell if they're up to the challenge. Back at Burrowers Central, we've created another burrow for a completely different kind of burrower. An endangered British species about which very little is known. The water vole. When we introduced a pair bred for conservation into our replica riverbank burrow, things didn't go quite as planned. But after a difficult few days, we did spot something intriguing. They'd blocked up 2 of the 3 entrances into their riverbank burrow.
Derek, we can't peep into Bonnie's nest, that the risk of disturbance would be too great, which is quite frustrating, but then we've got to behave. You know, what is likely to be going on in there?
Well, the simple answer, of course, is who knows? But what we know is that they make these large, coarse, almost kind of rugby ball-shaped nests. On the inside, there are these kind of like tiny, soft chambers with lots of very finely shredded material and moss. And these are the areas that the water voles give birth in, and this is where the babies live when they're very small. So if there are babies in there, that's where they'll be at the moment.
We don't have to wait long to find out. A few days later, through a small gap in Bonnie's nest, a tiny water vole pup reveals himself. Ratty Jr. Bonnie has a small litter of 3 pups, but she's still got her work cut out. They're blind and helpless, so she'll have to care for them until they can stand on their own 4 paws. On the other side of the farm, in our rabbit warren, there are now over 20 young kits, all ready to explore their underground home. And as they investigate their burrow, we can finally get to grips with the full extent of our real warren in the wild. I've returned to Bicton Park, where the excavation of our concrete cast is now complete. A bird's eye view shows us just how complex the warren is. With multiple living chambers and complex intersections. This warren has over 120 metres of tunnels and occupies the same floor space as the average new-build home. Our expert, Dr. Sasha Norris, has already been investigating.
I'm completely blown away by it. I think it's absolutely incredible. My first impressions are how much it looks like tree roots. I guess that you can expect that because the tree and the rabbit are doing the same thing. They're trying to find their way through the soil, and obviously there's going to be rocks, there's going to be bits they just can't get through, so they have to sort of go sideways. And so you've got that very organic shape. I think it's beautiful, actually. It's a rabbit sculpture.
But look at this, where the rabbit's claws have actually cut into the soil. It's been preserved forever, rather like the sort of rabbits of Pompeii.
So what can this structure teach us about life underground for our baby rabbits? Navigating around this maze is an impressive feat for an adult rabbit. But for a tiny kid, a warren can be up to 4,000 times its size. Pipkins' litter are 18 days old, and they're now ready to test the limits of the burrow. They've left their chamber, and they venture out into the adjoining tunnels.
Imagine being born in a warren like this, and then spending the first few weeks of your life entirely underground in a nest, and then you branch out and literally you're following your way through these tunnels using only a sense of smell, no light whatsoever.
But this network of tunnels would suddenly come alive when all of those young left their breeding nest and started to sort of move around. And there is a period where they're moving around inside the warren where they're not outside. So then it would become like a sort of
a bunny bundle.
Seething,
a bunny bundle.
Party underground.
As Pipkins' litter explore beyond their home chamber, they encounter other unrelated rabbits for the first time. In this rabbit nursery, all of the kids play together nicely. The same can't be said for their overprotective parents. Hazel and the other females have chosen nest chambers, and they defend them fiercely. Under stress, territorial mums can even kill kits from other litters that stumble into their path. Meanwhile, our badger expert, Chris Cheeseman, has set up a challenge for our young orphans. Are they natural-born diggers?
Chris, it's going to be interesting to see this, you know, because if they do anything, it's going to be instinctive. They've not had opportunity to learn any of this from any adult badgers.
One badger gets straight to work, and no surprise, it's the head of the group, the big female Luna.
Look at the power of those forelimbs.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful illustration of the way they can just pick it up like a spade and shift a lot of soil.
And then the back limbs are just pushing it back, aren't they? Just clearing it, basically.
Yes, they pull it underneath them, usually, when they're digging, and then they'll kick with the back legs just to clear it away.
Luna works away at the soil, but she's not the only one who's interested. Bramble, our small outsider, is keen to make an impression.
Bramble's coming as well now, look.
Well, Luna's the dominant animal in that little group. She's a bit bigger and a bit older, and little Bramble bringing up the rear, doing her share of the digging as well. And there's a desire to get through that. You can see there's a little bit of excitement there. Goodness, this is our way out. We need to sort this. And these are just young badgers, never had the benefit of learning from their mothers or the other badgers in the group. They're just instinctively doing what comes naturally.
And they've broken through.
In no time at all. What was that, 2 or 3 feet of soil?
Yeah.
They are powerful digging machines.
Our orphaned badger cubs have proved that they can really burrow. It's a skill they'll need before they can be released. And best of all, Bramble has become a key member of the family. But there is one more thing they'll have to learn before any of these badgers can take their first steps outside. They'll need to show they know how to defend their home. Whilst most of our burrowers are ready to step outside their burrows for the first time, there is one that's so specialist that it never has to leave. Our mystery creature gets everything it needs below the ground. What are the secrets of its success? How does it eat, drink, and even breathe? Well, to find out, we cast an abandoned burrow with concrete, just as we did for the rabbits, and unearthed a structure all the more extraordinary when you consider that it was probably created by just one animal in a single day. So what is this curious creature? It's the mole. Based on our burrow cast, we've created a mole burrow of our own.
So what we've got here are boxes with a closed system of tunnels which are as close to nature as possible and ideal for filming.
Our moles were rescued and have now been rehomed in our burrow. They should feel at home. For them, it's completely enclosed and just like being underground. So what can we learn about this ultimate burrower? One man who can help us is mole enthusiast Peter Stafford. At the age of just 17, Peter captured a series of astonishing images that remain the only pictures of a wild mole nest ever shot. And this picture won him the title of Wildlife Cameraman of the Year in 1967.
Look at this.
Yeah.
The
Absolutely
detail in these images is phenomenal.
I know, it's absolutely extraordinary.
Look at this,
Yeah,
powering along its tunnel.
yeah. Wonderful exploratory behaviour.
And look here, look, it's padding the surface with its nose as it comes forward, isn't it?
That's amazing.
Look at that, you can see all its whiskers pinching.
Yeah.
Our exciting new view of moles moving through the soil backs up a theory that Peter has had about them for years.
It's extraordinary footage. I would describe the motion of a mole through the soil as a swimming action. So it pulls itself through rather than digs its way through in the traditional way we think about burrowing.
This swimming mole theory might seem unlikely until you go underwater and watch a common seal in action. To really understand Peter's theory, you have to go below the surface and get down to the bare bones of his idea. A mole's skeleton is just like a miniature seal.
The seal here has its hands turned into these huge flippers for pushing through the water.
And here we have a spade or indeed a shovel by virtue of its sixth finger, which gives it that incredible width.
The key feature, though, is this modification of the forelimbs, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
And when you look
Exactly
at
the same there.
in the mole, I mean, that's an incredible piece of natural sculpture, isn't it?
Yeah, very few people would say that was an arm bone, would they?
No.
With a sixth finger on each of its front paws, short upper arms and reinforced shoulders, the mole moves through the soil just as the seal moves through water, pushing the soil away with sideways strokes. This is what's known as convergent evolution, two completely different animals that have evolved in the same way.
This is an animal that swims through the sea, and here we have an animal which, through similar adaptations, swims through the soil.
That's exactly what they both do.
But moles are solitary creatures, so we have to ask, why do they dig out such an extensive burrow? Well, it's not just a home, it's a trap. One that earthworms regularly fall for. The mole's tiny eyes are virtually useless in the dark, so instead it uses its nose. But not for smelling, for feeling. You see, its nose is covered with over 5,000 sensory cells called Eimer's organs. And these are so sensitive they can feel the tiniest of vibrations, even the moment when a worm drops into the burrow. The mole pulls the worm through its enormous paws, forcing out any dirt like toothpaste. And if it's not hungry, it bites off the head and uses venomous saliva to paralyze its prey. Which it then stores in a special chamber. A living larder full of tasty earthworms that never spoil. A few days after we last saw them, our young voles are ready to move out of their nest. At just a week old, the babies are nearly half the size of Mum. That's like a newborn baby growing into a 7-year-old in just 5 days. So how is it that they've grown quite so fast? Suckling. Amazingly, 4 of Bonnie's teats are close to her armpits, and this might be, like for other aquatic species, so her young can suckle in the water. But mother's milk is not enough on its own. In just a week, Ratty Jr. is already eating solids. In fact, all the pups are now raiding Mum's larder, and they're hungry. Water voles eat 80% of their own body weight every single day. So it won't be long before Mum's food store runs out. Soon the young water voles will have to leave the burrow to forage for food themselves on the riverbank. If there's one thing water voles aren't too fussy about, it's food. They'll eat up to 227 different types of plant, especially grasses. But so much roughage can be hard to handle. They've evolved some of the most formidable gnashers in the animal kingdom.
What have you got, Derek?
I have a waterfall skull, Chris.
It's a lovely specimen too, look at that. It's fantastic. Displaying all the attributes of a rodent skull. Those sharp incisors, the gap between those where they can move the food around once they've nibbled it off. And then the molars, if you hold that bit, Derek, I'm going to try and get a molar out. Because these are unique, aren't they? The hard enamel around the outside, the soft bit in the centre creates these ridges.
Yeah,
Look at that. But they're constantly growing. That's the point, isn't it? They're constantly growing because they're constantly wearing down on account of all that tough vegetation.
Yeah, very hard, abrasive material. But people just don't realise how abrasive, uncooked vegetation actually is. So you need to have something that's there as a solid grinding mass that basically is capable of breaking it down.
Ratty Jr. has some of the toughest teeth in the mammal world, and they're constantly growing. He'll need them so he can eat up all his greens. But also for the very thing that, like Dad, will define him as one of Britain's best burrowers. Digging. He chomps through the soil, sucks it in, spits it out, and then kicks it away with his paws. An adult water vole can excavate a tunnel system that's up to 70 metres long. It can gnaw through roots and even topple trees.
So you talk about the teeth, Derek. I've felt the teeth of a water vole. You probably felt the teeth of many. They can deliver quite a sharp bite.
Well, they can give you a scorcher of a bite, and what they also tend to do is once they've bitten you, they get those little front paws and they hang on. So it's just not a fun experience.
Inside our rabbit warren, Pipkins' litter are now 3 weeks old. They're much more adventurous and they're ranging right through the whole warren. They're exploring, getting to know this place like the back of their paw. But why? In our burrow, the kits are safe from predators, but they don't know that. Their wild instincts tell them to get to know every inch of their warren, for a very good reason. These tunnels aren't just a place to rest, but also full of escape routes.
This is really interesting. This has got 7 different tunnels coming off it, some going down, some going sideways and up. And if you imagine you're being pursued by a stoat through the warren, at this point, you can really confuse them, can't you? You can go off in any different direction.
Yeah.
And you intimately know this highway of tunnels. Because you live in it all the time, you know how to get away.
From that predator.
We built our warren inside a protected enclosure so there's no chance of a stoat attack. But our young rabbits still spend every moment learning all of the complex intersections and secret pathways. But will they be ready for their biggest step of all? One extreme way to avoid being eaten by any kind of predator is to spend your whole life underground, which is what moles do. Our moles will happily live out their lives in our replica burrow just as they would in the wild. But living your whole life below the surface isn't easy. Like all mammals, the mole needs oxygen, and that's in short supply. There's so little down here that we wouldn't be able to breathe. Our badgers now seem properly settled in their new residence. They've bonded as a group. Now they'll need to develop skills they'll need for encountering other badgers.
And if you look very carefully at their face, you can see they've got these very long, quite broad snouts. They've got big noses, that's what it comes down to. He's not looking at that soil, but she's sniffing that soil. And they have this snuffling behaviour. It's one of the things that defines the behaviour of badgers. And the reason that they're drawing in these massive intakes of breath is so that they can smell very quickly exactly what they're after.
But what are the scents they're so obsessed by? It's hard to see, but there's something that they're doing to each other with their hind quarters. And the results seem irresistibly smelly to the others. By scent marking, Luna is reaffirming her status at the top of the group. She and all of our badgers are leaving their perfumed calling cards. But they don't just scent mark each other, they also leave scent on their droppings.
Chris, it's fair to say that to the bulk of our audience, this will look like an ugly pile of poo. But to the badgers, this is like a veritable perfume counter, isn't it?
Well, this is part of a boundary latrine, which badgers mark their boundaries by defecating in these latrines. And this is a scent beacon, which sends a message to other badgers in the neighbouring groups that this is our patch and that's yours and stay there. And it is a mutually respected boundary marker. It's like a fence around your garden, really.
And they're very active when they're defecating. They get very excited when the badgers go. I've seen groups of badgers, 3 have arrived at once, and this is fantastic fun, isn't it? Finding a latrine, seeing who's been there, whether your rival's been there, digging a pit, adding your own, refreshing that signal.
That's exactly right. They do get really worked up, almost frantically scratching around and smelling. We can't smell it unless you stick your nose right down there, but to a badger this is really full of scents.
I'm going to give it a go, but it's quite old, this stuff, because it does have a characteristic smell, doesn't it?
Very musty.
It's not too strong, but it's characteristic.
Musty.
Yeah, musty. It's not, very different than a fox, which is much more bitter. So once you learn the smell, you can always tell.
I bet you couldn't tell the difference between the different badgers.
Give me a chance, hold on. That's Brian. That's... Yeah, Brian and Stan. Yeah, that's Stan. And Stan had a worm tandoori that night. Definitely.
Scent-marked latrines are vitally important because badgers from a family group usually don't take kindly to trespassers on their patch. Our badgers will need to recognise the scented latrines of their group to protect themselves in the future when they're released into the wild. With each wiggle of the end of her tail, Luna demonstrates her scenting language skills, and the others follow suit. Back at Burrowers Central, Pipkins' litter are now nearly 4 weeks old. They're looking a lot less like baby bunnies and more like small versions of their mum. And these physical features are vital to their survival above ground. The big moment has arrived. Pipkins' young are as ready as they'll ever be to undertake the journey they've spent the last 4 weeks preparing for. With Mum Pipkin leading the way, they venture into the outside world. But how will they take in the foreign sights and sounds and their first breath of fresh air? Sasha and I are waiting eagerly.
Here they come, Chris.
Look at that. On the brink. It's quite a brave moment for these little things, isn't it?
We know that there aren't any predators in our enclosure, but they don't know that.
Even without the threat of being eaten, the outside world is overwhelming. Bright sunshine, new smells, new sounds, and boisterous adults. For some of Pipkin's litter, it's just too much. All they want to do is huddle for security. And Mum Pipkin is on hand to reassure them.
Look how attentive she is here. She's head up the whole time. She's not feeding at all. She's looking around, constantly vigilant. And then occasionally she's thumping away there to warm them. And they're all in a little tight cluster as well, aren't they? Which is exactly what you'd want.
The kids don't just look to Mum for protection.
This is interesting. We've seen them grooming one another in the warren, and now when they're out there, they're all looking after one another.
That's a way of forming affiliations with other rabbits, so they don't just groom their own family, they also groom other litters and other adults. This is how they tell each other that they're part of a group and maintain that group.
It's a behaviour called allo-grooming. You see, physical contact builds bonds and secures friendships so everyone can watch out for danger. Because outside the warren, security for a rabbit is a case of safety in numbers.
The more rabbits there are, the more eyes, the more ears. Therefore, for the individual, the more time spent feeding. Now look, they're taking their first fresh meal, if you like. Because up until this point, they've been fed on the mother's milk.
And what's interesting is they actually learn the right types of food to eat from the chemicals that are inside the milk that they drank when they were in the warren.
So it's almost they know the flavour and they can go out and then pick up the scent and eat that to get them going.
That's right, yeah, and they know that those plants won't be poisonous because their mum ate them and survived.
I wonder what it's like, though, that first bite of a fresh leaf. That must be a flavour sensation for them.
Our kits' preparation for the outside has served them well. They've used their time in the burrow to grow and learn vital skills for survival. But there are still trials ahead. Life for an adolescent rabbit is fraught with challenges, and their instincts tell them to always be cautious. When one is spooked, everyone is back in their burrow in just a few hops. At our riverbank burrow, the water voles are busy. Bonnie can be seen restocking the larder, and Mr. Ratty is taking his daily dip. But so far the youngsters haven't made an appearance outside.
I suppose we've got to look at these, Derek, and think that the burrow has provided them with enough security to mature to the stage that they can be this independent this quickly. They're the right size, they've taken on board all of the weight they require to be strong enough and fit enough, and now it's a more testing time, really. They've got to find their own way in this world.
It's really something, really been quite a remarkable thing to see.
In just 2 weeks, that's half the time it took our baby rabbits, our young water voles are ready to step outside and take their first swim. After just a moment's hesitation, our first young water vole is straight into the water. And then there are two. They love the water and a good play. But where's Ratty Jr.? At first, he's not as confident as the others. But after a little comfort eating, he finally ventures out. He soon masters the water, although he hasn't quite mastered getting out. It's Mum Bonnie to the rescue, whilst his dad takes a more relaxed approach.
This is a happy conclusion, isn't it, really, when you think about it? At last, the youngsters have come out into the wider world, into the water, and they're looking good. There's something personally satisfying, I've got to say.
Yeah, it's really lovely. I mean, it's just delightful to see them behaving in this way. I mean, they're just beautiful animals.
There's only one group of burrowers still to step outside, the badgers. Our orphaned cubs are now 3 months old. In the wild at around this age, cubs are encouraged to leave the set by their mothers. But here, without parents to guide them, we open up the burrow and hope they'll take their first steps outside. It's the first real test of how well they've bonded as a group. Will they face the outside world together? As badgers are nocturnal, we'll have to wait until it's dark. At first, it looks as if Luna is on her own. But as night falls, another badger appears. And then Bramble follows, hot on their heels. Eventually, the whole group explores together. Now, it's a protected enclosure, but our orphans don't know that. Any strange scent or sound, and they're on the alert. It's a great sign that our badgers are instinctively sensing danger. One cub has got a bit overexcited. Luna can't resist a good romp. So the 7 cubs have taken a brave step, but that's enough for one night. Before long, they all head back inside to the familiarity and comfort of their set. Next time, how will our rabbits cope with a warren that's full to bursting? Will our young water voles be ready for life in the wild? And will our badgers learn to talk badger and be ready to leave the set for good?